on assist those who may need it. And a person doesn't necessarily have to request it. It can be private. It's just something that they might choose themselves. So if you can, great. If not, totally get it. Maybe we're not all dressed nicely and ready to go on a Wednesday morning. Okay, so some people said their cameras don't work. I get it. Some people don't even have cameras on their computer. I have an external camera. So first of all, thank you guys so much for joining today. Holly and I are here to talk about how to work with individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf blind. So that could mean you're a coworker. It could mean a resident. But a lot of today we're going to be talking about residents. And for you may not know that a person is deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf blind. They may not mention it to you. There are some cues we'll talk about that you can figure out that they might be. But we're here to talk about access and communicating over phone, internet, which is called telecommunications, and how a person would utilize these specific tools and services. So I'm going to share my screen first, and then hold on, give me 1 second. Okay, there you go. So I won't be able to see everybody on the screen, unfortunately, but if you raise your hand, that would be great. And perhaps if someone monitoring like Erin or Jennifer can let me know. We do encourage questions during the presentation. We don't want you to forget those questions. So if you have a question, please don't feel like you're interrupting us. Just raise your hand and you'll get your question asked. Okay, so I am with the Communications Technology Program, also known as CTP, at the, let me go to the next slide, at the Colorado Commission for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Deaf Blind. So this program focuses on devices, equipment. We provide the tools which allows a deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf blind person to access communication, whether it may making a phone call on a home phone or a smartphone or a computer, if they need to surf the net, if they need to text, if they need to email. Those are all forms of telecommunications, and we provide the devices to those who qualify. And then Holly, can you introduce yourself and where you're with?
Good morning. My name is Holly Bice. I am with the Department of Regulatory Agencies, and within that department is the Public Utilities Commission. And so Relay Colorado is a program that sits within the Public Utilities Commission. And we provide, like Joanne's talking about the technology that she provides, we provide the services. So if an individual wanted to, let's say, use something called caption telephone service, we provide that actual service. It's a state program. It's free of charge. And that has actually been around since about 1990 is when this started. In addition to telecommunication relay services, we also provide some more modern technology like relay conference captioning, which allows individuals to access Zooms, webinars, online conferences, and have closed captioning for their events.
Thank you, Holly. So we're going to go back and forth, just so you know. Holly and I will take turns at some point. But again, if anything is not clear, please raise your hand. Okay, so this is just a basics. I think Erin is or was going to share this PowerPoint with everybody, because within the PowerPoint are links to what you see on the screen. And it's nice little helpful information guides, tips on how to communicate with somebody who is deaf or hard of hearing. And we use the word also, we say often deaf blind, because that's number one is part of the commission. But deaf blind does not mean fully deaf and fully blind. There is a variant, just like deaf and hard of hearing. A person can be fully deaf or hard of hearing, low vision to fully blind. And we provide services for deafblind consumers as well in our state. These particular information sheets, though, are really beneficial. I would suggest when you have time to go through these attachments, because it will provide you with guidance and information on how to work with people who are deaf or hard of hearing, such as I mentioned before. How do I know if somebody's hard of hearing or deaf? One thing would be if they wear hearing aids. That might be a visual cue that you can see that they are hard of hearing. But with hearing aids being so tiny nowadays, whether they're being in the ear or even behind the ear, they're so tiny. Even what used to be a tube, it looks like almost a very fine hair or wire. So you can barely see, if you can, when a person wears hearing aids. So they might tell you that they're hard of hearing or deaf. Of course, if somebody uses American Sign Language, that means that they are deaf. They rely on ASL for communication access. Other tips to know if somebody is hard of hearing is that they're looking at your lips without realizing it. They're reading your lips. They may ask you to repeat. They may ask you to speak louder, but I want to note that just speaking louder doesn't necessarily mean they can hear it. The louder you speak, the more vibration there is. So just ask them, how do you want for yourself to speak? My suggestion is somewhat louder, but clear and slow. So you're enunciating. Don't speak fast. Don't mumble your words, things of that nature. Another tip to know if somebody is hard of hearing, deaf or hard of hearing, is if they're positioning themselves where they're actually not looking at you, and it's kind of, they're giving you their better ear. They're looking off to another area and they're leaning in and they're using their ear that is better than the other. That is also an indication. It is best if the person themselves lets you know versus you asking, because again, that might be private information to them and they may not want to divulge it, or they may just not label themselves as it, and that's totally fine as well. So that's what a lot of these attachments relate to. They also discuss, if you do have an individual who is deaf and uses sign language, we at the commission offer a sign language interpreters list. So if you need to hire an interpreter, you'll be able to refer to that list. That is something you would be obligated to provide as part of your agency. And then also discussing the various video platforms and how to communicate with a deaf or hard of hearing person, how to set up the platform, how to set up Zoom, how to pin people. That's what that attachment's for. So that is very beneficial when you have large meetings, whether it be staff or with your residents. Any questions so far? I'm going to ask that anyway. Nothing? Okay.
Joanne, real quick, this is Holly.
Yes.
There was a question in the chat,
Oh,
but
yes.
the question was, are TTYs the standard? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about like what is required versus what is common. And so we will touch on that question a little bit later in the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that question. And thank you, Holly. Okay. So when we at the CTP, at the commission, provide individuals or try to match individuals with the proper device, we do an assessment, kind of similar to what you guys do. Do you guys do an intake with your consumers? Maybe raise your hand. If you do, there's a raise hand function. Anybody at your residence do an intake of your consumers when they apply? No? Okay. Well, we've got some thumbs up. Okay, great. It is a good idea to do that, because then you'll know what accommodations this person might need. This is a type of assessment we do when we're matching individuals up with technology. Age of consumer is obviously important. Older adults, honestly, are probably the largest population who are hard of hearing, because it's just something that we age into. At some point, we might all, or some of us, lose some of our hearing. It's just nature. It's the impact of listening to things loud, headsets, environment, and just age itself. We also look at the home environment. If it's a one room household, or where their TV is set up, do they have their TV on loud, things of that nature. We take a look at that as well. We do in-person assessments a lot of times in somebody's home, so we're able to see that. And since you are at their residence, you could actually do that type of assessment. So we can gauge their hearing acuity by speaking to them. We find out what types of phones they use. I'm just going to run through this quickly. Mobility issues. If somebody's on a walker or wheelchair, we want to make sure we say, for example, give them a cordless handset or a cell phone versus a corded one, so they always have it with them in case of emergency, or so they don't have to rush to the phone. What is their vision like? That is also important to know when you're providing anybody any type of device, whether it be telecommunications or anything else in their home. Vision is an important thing to be aware of. Okay, next slide. So again, I'm not really going to go in depth on this, but these are just some types of devices that we provide in the CTP program. An amplified phone just provides a significant amount more amplification. So if you're talking to somebody on the phone and they can't hear you very well, there are equipment that we provide that gives them better access, whether they just need to get better, they need to hear it better through it being louder, or to adjust a person's voice, or they need to, let's see, if they're a soft talker, it also provides outgoing, louder speech. So they have a lot of different features that match a person's needs. That is something, if you're talking to someone on the phone and they don't hear you well, you could just say, oh, I've got a program for you. Let me refer you to the CTP program or Relay Colorado, and they'll have better access. So they're not going to be missing phone calls. They're not going to miss your call. They're not going to miss the doctor's appointment call, etc. So here's just some visual. They just look like regular off-the-shelf phones that you see in the store, but these have specialized features like the ones I mentioned. To give you an idea, a typical off-the-shelf amplified phone is about 15 decibels in amplification. And what does that mean? It's just a number, but an amplified phone goes up to about 55 decibels. So for every 1 decibel, it's 10 times stronger, and that is above current speech. So if I'm speaking on the phone like this, and I'm using an amplified phone and I set it to 40, it's going to go 40 decibels over how I'm already speaking. Now, if you're not hard of hearing, I do not suggest using an amplified phone, picking up an amplified phone that somebody has set to say 50. It could do some damage. It would be technically temporary, but it might hurt. Just it's like somebody screaming in your ear potentially. These are some of our also cordless amplified phones. A lot of our older adults like this particular one has a larger handset. For some reason, they like white phones. Maybe you notice them more, they light up. Again, there's lots of different features you don't have to know about. All you have to do is let your residents know that these are available to them. One other thing to know, that if you do not know if somebody is hard of hearing, if you're going to somebody's door and you're knocking on their door and they're not answering, and then you also hear the TV on super loud, those are also indications that the person is hard of hearing. Now, sometimes people do put their TVs on loud because they don't want people to think they live alone. So that might be a reason, but typically it's because the person is hard of hearing. I can't tell you how many times a consumer calls me, or I call a consumer and their TV's on so loud and they can't hear me, and I say, can you just please turn the TV down in the background? I mean, there's other solutions that can turn on captioning on the television, but typically a lot of older adults like to listen to their TV quite loud. So, but that would be an indication for you, not answering the door, loud television, things of that nature. Again, just another example, corded ones, lots of different features. So that's why we do that assessment. And then I'm going to ask you guys, I know we're all part of the population. How many here have a landline analog phone? Raise of hand if anybody has home phone service. Okay, we've got one person. Anybody else? And analog is the traditional phone service. We also have digital phone line where it goes through the internet. It just piggybacks on the internet. So maybe you pay your internet company for phone service and internet, and it's just piggybacking over it. Anybody? I just see one person in this whole group. I see two people, maybe one and a half. So many people are giving up their landline home phone service because we've got cell phones. Also, traditional analog service is slowly being pulled back and replaced by phone service over internet. Yes, and Dane, the person's last name, I will be talking about the transcription apps also at the end as well. So I just wanted to show you that there are phones available where you don't even have to have home phone service. Oh, Mira, thank you. These connect to your cell phones. So you just pair your cell phone via Bluetooth with these phones, and it gives you a home-based phone. And it gives you amplification, loud ringer, all those good things. So if you've got a resident who only can afford cell phone service, they still have the opportunity to benefit from an amplified phone by just pairing it with their cell phone. And we can assist with that and the setup of it as well. So it's not like just because somebody only has a cell phone, they can't benefit from this technology and access.
And Joanne, this is Holly. I was going to give a quick tidbit of information. Back in 2018, we identified that there were roughly 800,000, so almost 1 million people a year in Colorado using landline telephones. Now, in the year 2024, that number has gone down to about 450,000 for the entire year who are using landline telephones. So we're seeing a steep decline. And if you had asked, 12, 15 years ago, that number would have been well over 1 million. So as landlines decline, you see wireless going up. So we do see this shift changing in technology.
Right. Holly, do you mind, can you explain how these programs are funded since you just mentioned that? Can you add that on?
Sure. So here at the Public Utilities Commission, we have what is called the Telephone Users with Disabilities Surcharge. And if you look on any of your bills, whether you have a landline, whether you have a voice over IP, or whether you have a wireless account, you will see a surcharge. It may be called like a relay surcharge or disabled telephone surcharge. That surcharge is applied to every person in Colorado who has what is called an access line, and we collect that on a monthly basis. Your phone provider remits it to us, and then we use those funds to support a variety of programs. It supports my program, Relay Colorado. A large portion of the fund goes to the Commission for the Deaf and supports Joanne's program, as well as some of the other programs that the Commission has. It also goes to the Talking Book Library, where they produce audio materials, like take newspapers and put it into audio for those who are unable to see. And so that is essentially how these programs operate, is through that surcharge. Right now it's set at 3 cents. We've seen it go up as high as 15 cents, which is the cap that it can go to. We've also seen it as low as a penny. So it really just depends how much how many lines are in the state at any given time. It used to be, prior to 2016, it was only applied to landline customers. And we saw a real disparity in that landline customers were essentially footing the bill for all these programs. So in 2016, we went to, there was legislation that was passed, so that surcharge is now applied to all phone lines. So now everybody in Colorado equally contributes to that surcharge, and then the funds go back out to the different programs in the state.
Thank you, Holly. I don't want to, Anna Fairchild asked a question earlier, and I don't want to feel like I just was able to pull up the chat. You're asking about individuals with developmental disabilities. While some of my consumers do have developmental disabilities or delayed or cognitive disabilities, we do here at the Commission focus on individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind. So if it's just a developmental disability, there are other organizations that I can definitely refer you to for support on that. I know you said that you need support with them to fill out forms, evaluation forms as well. I will provide that information to Erin, Anna, so perhaps you could reach out to that organization for support with those forms. And I'm just going through the questions real quick. Again, TTY we will address later, and as well as smartphones. So thank you, Holly, for that explanation of where the funding comes from. Luckily, it used to be we just collected off landlines, and I'm glad we do collect from wireless and VoIP and such, because if we didn't, the funding pool would be depleted, because as you see, the number of individuals with landline are going down significantly, and the devices we're supporting support more on a wireless VoIP focus. Okay, I'm just going on the next slide. Okay, so there are other solutions as well if somebody needs both, amplified as well as caption. This is just an example where it connects a phone to a tablet. Now, there is no internet needed. This is great for your residents. If they cannot afford internet, they can actually even pair their cell phone to this particular phone. So they don't need landline. They just have to have some sort of phone service, so their cell phone. And we would just connect it wirelessly to the phone you see on the left, and it's hard connected to a tablet on the right. And I know Mara mentioned apps. This actually is using Live Transcribe, which is part of Google, but it does not need internet to do so with this particular tablet. So again, many people just can't afford internet, and we do have solutions for that as well. If you need support, if you have residents who need financial support with phone or internet, you can reach out to me. There is a federal program that does provide some support, and then some internet providers also provide discounts as well. I think I just lost a page. I don't know why. Oh, I'm not going to show this, but you guys will have the slide. This is just a video of what it looks like when this device is in action. Okay. So, and again, these are just the different setups. You can connect it with your cell phone. You can connect it with your existing phone. If you have a staff member who's hard of hearing, you actually can connect it to a work phone, and they'll have captioning on the tablet as well. They can even disconnect the tablet and bring it with them to caption in-person conversations, which we will talk about in a bit as well. Right now, we're focusing on telecommunications, meaning talking on the phone, the internet, etc. Okay, I'm going to hand this off to Holly to talk about the services that support captioning and such. Holly?
Great, thanks, Joanne. So this is Holly. 3 services that Relay Colorado provides, and I want to put the caveat in that these are not all of the Relay services that are available. These are just the ones that the state of Colorado provides. The first being traditional relay and speech-to-speech. So this would be what is your kind of antiquated technology like the TTY. The TTY has been around for more than 40 years. And it started as these really big, huge machines. They are now small little machines. They were most of the time they require a landline. They don't work as well when you have a digital connection. And the number of people using those is in the decline. It's been in the decline since really the internet took off. So if you think about, probably around 2006, 2007, this huge burst of like folks using what is called video relay services, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So we're seeing a decline on the traditional relay and the speech-to-speech services. Caption telephone, we saw a couple different devices that Joanne showed. Essentially, this is a device where they can read the captioning. We provide anything that's connected to a landline service. The state of Colorado is responsible for covering the cost of that, and it's a per minute cost. So if an individual is on the phone for 20 minutes, then the state is paying for those 20 minutes of talk time plus any type of setup and wrap up time. If they are connected to an internet connection, then the federal government is covering those costs, and that is the program that's under the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. One of the, depending, sometimes caption telephones can have a little bit of a lag time. So if you are talking to an individual on a caption telephone, or you may not even notice that you're talking to them on a caption telephone, but what might happen is you might ask a question, and it may take a few seconds before they respond. And that is because as the person speaks, it's going through voice recognition software. Then the communication assistant is actually revoicing everything that it said before it gets put into text on the telephone. So there is a delay in that. We hope that it's not more than a 3-second delay. Depending on what type of connection they have, it could be a little bit longer than that. So just something to be cognizant of, that if you see or if you hear a little bit of delay in between questions, that it might be that that individual in the other line is waiting for their captionings to show up, whether that's on a caption telephone or any other device. You can sometimes expect a delay. And then relay conference captioning is fairly new. It's something that was added to our services in 2015. It is not part of any type of traditional landline services. It's strictly based on those who have an internet connection. And it would be for individuals who need captioning during their virtual conferences, webinars, meetings. If they are not able to get, let's say they want to attend a virtual webinar, and that organization has said, you know what, we just don't have the budget to provide captioning, they could come to Relay Colorado and request that, and we would provide live captioning. And what I mean by live captioning is that there is an actual captionist who is using stenography technology, typing out everything in shorthand and putting it into captions. It's different than if you were to hit the little CC button at the bottom of your screen. This would be using speech technology. So it's using AI systems to listen to what I say and put it into text. RCC is actually using real people listening and who are highly trained in stenography and putting it into text. So it's much more accurate than using, quote unquote Siri, who we all know if you use Siri or Alexa or anything like that, it is not always very accurate. And that is why some folks appreciate using the live captionist more, is the accuracy that can come from that. That again is a free program. The state pays for that. Again, we pay by the minute. We actually pay a pretty high dollar per minute. It's almost $4 per minute that the state pays, but that's no cost to the end user. And I think I answered everything on that. And again, I think I hit on these a little bit, but TTYs. Oh, sorry, Joanne, will you go to the next one? Or I'm sorry, I don't know who's running the slide. You can go to the next slide. Perfect.
I was on mute as well. Sorry. Talking to myself.
Did you want to add anything, John?
Oh, I was just going to say, yes. So TTY, I would say we do provide TTY in this program as well, but the distribution of it is severely low. I would say maybe 1 or 2 every few years we do provide. This is also because a TTY does have to operate on a landline. When a person has a digital line, which is a VoIP, in the notes I put in the chat, I put the definition of VoIP and what that means, what the difference between landline and a VoIP line is. It doesn't always work on a digital line or a VoIP line. So TTYs are kind of falling off the radar, also because deaf people who use sign language as their primary mode of communication And I apologize, Holly will go into the definition of TTY, but since somebody asked that, the need has lessened. Individuals who have speech disability are still using TTY, so that is still an area where they are being used. Holly, please go ahead.
Sure thing. And to the question that was in the chat earlier about whether TTYs are like the standard, and this is where this can be a little bit frustrating in that the federal government says that TTYs are the standard. 911, the Department of Justice says that in order for somebody with a hearing disability to connect to 911, the minimum standard is a TTY. But as Joanne just said, there is a severe decline in TTYs. And here in Colorado, we ask all of the local 911 centers how many TTY calls they get a year, and often their response is 0. So because the decline is happening, but unfortunately because the federal government and many states have not changed their minimum standards, we still have to meet those minimum standards and provide TTYs. But that is not the main use of communication anymore for people with hearing loss. For deaf signing individuals, they're using video relay services. For hard of hearing people, they are probably using more things like caption telephone or apps on their phone rather than the TTYs. And it's because it's a little cumbersome. You have a device that you can't travel with, has to connect to a landline. A deaf individual types. The communication assistant takes everything that's typed and speaks it, and then everything that is spoken by the party on the other end, the communication assistant types it back so the deaf individual can read it. It's a little less natural feeling. The communication assistants are not like trained interpreters, so they're very verbatim. They read everything as it's written instead of trying to match tone and affect, which sign language interpreters through video relay services are doing more of those things. And then
Holly, Erin has a question, but then also Mara Dane had a question comment as well.
I was just going to cover Mira's question. She said, would people with selective mutism be covered for TTY?
Can you identify selective mutism for me, Mira? It's an anxiety disorder that people. So if it were to be considered like a speech disability, then yes, because TTYs, Relay Colorado services, can be for anybody with hearing or speech disabilities. So, you know, if they were to identify that it was something that impacts their speech, I do believe that that is something that we could justify covering.
And I just want to also note that, remember, this is for making calls. We will talk about other solutions for also making calls or in-person communication via wireless. But also just want to throw that out there, when a person is deaf, we don't use the term mute, but I appreciate you explaining that. They do have voice capability. They just prefer to use sign language, as Holly mentioned, and use video relay service. Also, I was going to state that with the TTY, I would say more in older times when it was more in use. English is not the first language, so keep this in mind also when you're doing intake or whatever with a consumer who might be a deaf signer, is that sometimes English is not their first language. So that's why typing on a TTY, which of course is English based, the message may not come across accurately. And like Holly said, the communication assistants are not interpreters. They're just reading it verbatim, so it could be misunderstood what is being said. So whenever you're speaking to somebody who is using a TTY, again, the relay operator will announce that this person is using either a TTY or video relay service. Keep that in mind when you're communicating with them. And if anything is unclear, please clarify with the caller, because it may be, we want to make sure it's interpreted correctly or voiced correctly depending on what they are using.
Thanks, John. I think we can go to the next slide on this one.
Okay.
So caption telephone is definitely becoming more popular. There's a couple different types of caption telephone. The one that the state provides connects to a landline, but then there's a whole slew of caption telephones that connect to internet services. And they can be the standard hand-based ones, like kind of in the left top corner there, or it could also be apps on the phone. So the user uses their own voice, so they do have to have the ability to use their own voice. And then there is, like I mentioned, when the person they're calling speaks, there is a communication assistant who listens to it, revoices what is said, and then that revoice of the communication assistant is put into text. We are starting to see a shift now where they are getting rid of the live communication assistants and they are using speech recognition technology, or ASR, automatic speech recognition. So we are seeing this shift where they are starting to use machine generated, cloud-based captions instead of live individuals doing it. And that's where I said you can choose between auto or assisted captions. It depends on what type of service the individual is using. Some providers only offer ASR, and some offer both ASR, automatic speech recognition, as well as a live operator.
And I'm just going to add, typically caption phones start with ASR. And then if a person is not getting the captions clear, if they're not accurate, they can voice and request a caption, a live captioner, but then they can't go back to ASR. So it's only one direction they can go.
Yeah.
So also, I was also going to say, sorry, Holly, is a person may never tell you they're using a caption phone. You don't have a live operator. You can't hear them on the line like you can with VRS or TTY. So you won't know unless the caller says they're using one. So if you notice ever, because you're going to have to assume, or you can't assume, is if you're talking to somebody and there's this pause, you ask a question and there's this pause, it could be that the caller is catching up to the conversation, because we hear faster than we read. So just keep that in mind. Don't think they hung up. You could ask, are you still there? And then they'll say, oh, yes, I'm just using a caption phone. But it is up to them to let you know that. But just keep that in mind if there is a pause in the conversation because they have not hung up.
Yeah, and the captionist only hears the non-deaf, non-hard of hearing person's words. They don't hear the other side of that phone call, versus an interpreter knows what both people on the end are saying for video relay. The captionist only knows, they can only hear the person who's using, whose words are being put into text. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide on this one. Okay, and now we talk about video relay services. As I mentioned, we had almost 1 million lines, probably 15 years ago. Now we're down to, and I say landlines, and so we had higher numbers of TTYs. And now that video relay services have come into play, landlines are declining, TTYs are declining, and more people are using video relay services. And so video relay services, so sorry. So video relay services would be an individual would have the ability to see a sign language interpreter on their screen. They would sign themselves. The interpreter would watch them sign and take everything that they're signing and put it into English, and then do just the opposite. They would listen to the person speaking English, and they would then sign it for the deaf person to be able to see their sign language. This is where we're seeing much more high usage for those who identify as deaf or culturally deaf and whose predominant language is ASL. It's a little bit more of a natural feeling versus the TTY, where the communication assistant reads verbatim. So if a deaf person typed, "I store go," the communication assistant is going to read, I store go. An ASL interpreter is going to know that that means I went to the store. And they're going to voice it as I went to the store, even though the signs may be I finish store go. What it really means is I went to the store. So it feels a little bit more natural using the VRS. But again, calls still can be mistaken for solicitation. You don't, sometimes you may hear a male interpreter voice, but you know that the caller is female. So that throws people off sometimes. So just be cognizant, be aware, kind of know those things in the back of your head. It's not a spam call. It's not a solicitor. It may just be a relay service call. And the VRS is also paid for by the federal government under the FCC. All right, and I think we can go to the next slide on that one. I'll probably just skip over this one. This is very similar to TTYs, but instead of using a landline connection, you can do the exact same process from your computer. You can type on your computer, but very, very similar to a TTY.
I just want to note that a lot of deaf-blind consumers may use IP relay because if they sign, they may not be able to see the interpreter on the screen, so they'll use IP relay. One thing I did not put in here, and I apologize since I did mention deaf-blind, there is a software now called MyMMX. It does allow a deaf-blind consumer who signs and either uses Braille or has some vision for magnification, they can use an interpreter independently on the screen, and the interpreter, instead of words coming on the screen as a deaf person would see it, it either translates into Braille onto the blind person's Braille display or gets magnified on the blind person's end. So it's a much larger font. So again, it's just another version of a relay service. It's very small, not used hugely because it's a small audience who uses that type of technology, but it is available. So if you have any consumers who are both low vision and deaf or hard of hearing, don't expect you to remember all this. Just refer them over to us and we'll get them the right support.
Great. Thanks, Joanne.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one to touch on a little bit is speech-to-speech services. So Relay Colorado also offers services to those who may have some type of speech disability. They don't have to have hearing loss as well, but speech-to-speech services would use specially trained communication assistants who have training in recognizing certain speech patterns to support those who have a speech disability make their phone calls. And let's go to the next slide.
I'm just going to give you an example because I do get some consumers. While the commission doesn't cover speech, I always like to provide resources for individuals still. So just think if a person maybe went through cancer treatment, lost their voice, they could be obviously born with the inability to speak, but there's lots of reasons why a person loses the ability to speak. Probably the most common ones that I see is for individuals going through cancer treatment, for the calls that I receive.
Yep. And even though the Commission for the Deaf is specifically tasked with providing equipment for those who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf-blind, if Joanne ever does get any of those, or if you know anybody who needs technology to assist them with a speech disability, our program Relay Colorado is willing to support purchase equipment for them directly. So. And then just some quick tips if you ever receive these types of calls. These also work, if you're just working with somebody in person who may have some type of hearing or speech loss, just speak to them in the same manner that you would any other caller. Yes, you want to make sure that you are enunciating, that you're speaking at an appropriate pace, but you don't have to change things up. You don't have to go, tell him his doctor's appointment is at 5 o'clock. you can just say your doctor's appointment is at 5 o'clock. And that works whether you're on the phone or whether you're in person. Using a normal tone, sometimes if you slow down too much, it can actually cause some issues if you're using, let's say, a video relay service, because oftentimes interpreting ASL and what you're doing, you're not interpreting word for word, you're interpreting entire concepts. So if you're talking at a very super slow speed, the interpreter may not know what the concept is of that sentence to be able to interpret it. So nice and steady is good. Too slow, too fast, try to avoid. Avoiding abbreviations that may be very local, we try to avoid those. Oftentimes, if you're calling, through a relay service, your communication assistant or your interpreter is not in Colorado often. So try to avoid things that are, very specific to an area. We've talked about delayed responses, a little bit of silence that can be due to a lag time or the interpreter or operator trying to catch up. If you already know something about a client and what the interpreter or the communication assistant has said seems to conflict with it, you can always re-ask your question, and that is for clarification. If you know that their birthday is in December, but you hear them say, oh, my birthday's in October, you may want to clarify and say, I'm sorry, will you repeat that birth date again for me? Because it could have been an interpreter or a communication assistant error. We talked about the affect and the tone. You may have a customer who is very upset about something, or a client, but if they're using text relay, the communication assistant may say, I am so mad right now. You will not believe how mad I am. While an interpreter might be, I am so mad right now. They are going to try and take that tone and affect. But if it's via text, we don't make assumptions. And so it is just verbatim, word for word. And then don't engage with side conversations. If you're in a room with an interpreter and a deaf individual, asking the interpreter, how long have you been doing this? Do you enjoy interpreting? We try to avoid that. Interpreters try to show up and be very neutral in an environment, almost to the point where them being invisible is better. Now, obviously, if it's a question about the interpreting process, that is okay. It's always best to engage with the consumer or client directly and ask them, like, oh, where do you think the interpreter should be in the room? Do you have a preference where the interpreter should be in the room? Because if you ask the interpreter, they're going to go ask the client. So just engaging directly with the consumer is always ideal compared to the service provider. And then I think since COVID, we've all kind of learned, when you're on these Zoom calls, these conference calls, just helping identify yourself. Every time I speak, this is Holly. That way, if somebody is using some type of relay service, or let's say they're using the relay conference captioning in a virtual meeting, they are going to be able to know who is speaking, because if they say, hi, this is Holly, the interpreter is going to sign, hi, this is Holly, or the captionist will type, hi, this is Holly, and then the consumer can follow along a little bit better. Joanne, anything to add on that one?
No, I think what you said was perfect.
Great.
Sorry.
I was just going to say if there were any questions or thoughts before we kind of hop off the service side of things and go back into some of the tech.
Also, I did want to say, because this leads to what Holly said, not just for, again, we're talking about a lot of different settings, not just telecommunications, in person as well. So when you're talking about if you're meeting with a consumer or staff and somebody's deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf blind, think about the lighting, think about background noise. Environment is critical. Like Holly said, where the interpreter will be up to the consumer, but also think about if there is somebody hard of hearing and you have the door open and there's a conversation going outside the door, perhaps close the door. But, again, just make sure that the consumer understands everything and not just like, nodding that they do, just make sure that they do, and it's a good environment for everybody. Okay. Any questions? We just have less than 10 minutes left, and I'm going to get through hopefully some other stuff. But again, you'll have the slideshow. These are just some other examples of devices we provide in the program. Their phone rings. How do they know their phone rings? They have light flashers. They have bed shakers. They have devices, notification systems that can work with not only their home phone service, but their cell phone service. And that's what you see in the picture there. So, I mean, we take advantage of, you might say, well, the phone vibrates in my pocket and that's good enough. I mean, how many times do you either have your phone on silent, don't feel the vibration? There are settings on the phone. You can actually have your phone, the back of the phone flash when your cell phone is ringing, but what if you have that phone upside down and the flash is down? So there's many times as a hearing person, we could potentially hear our phone vibrate or the ringer going off, but a deaf, hard of hearing and deafblind person wouldn't have that, perhaps that benefit. There is also, for the blind, there is a tactile wearable receiver, not like a Apple Watch, but an Apple Watch does that as well, but other types of tactile wearable devices that are available. So, oops. Okay, so this is not telecommunications, but remember I mentioned if you are knocking on somebody's door and they're not answering the door, if they're deaf or hard of hearing, they probably don't hear the knock on the door or they don't hear the doorbell. There are devices available, doorbells that then cause that light flasher to the right. So if it was a doorbell, it would flash. Sorry, I'm gonna have to look straight. Let's close the screen. Green. So this is a color-coded light notification system. So doorbell goes off, light will flash green. The one in the middle is a smoke detector sound collector. You do not have to replace all the smoke detectors in somebody's residence. You just get the main home aware system that I mentioned in the previous slide, the one with the alarm clock and the smartphone transmitter. You just add this next to this on the ceiling next to the smoke detector or carbon monoxide detector. And when the sound goes off, it sends a signal to the main base and it will say fire, and the light will flash on this far right flasher red. So each notification has a different color. Phone is, I believe, white. Again, doorbell green, fire red, and there's other colors and other notification devices you can add to it. There are other types of notification systems. So if you ever want to, if you have questions and you want to incorporate that into any of your residents, it's very important because I hate to say it, the #1 cause of death and fires are older adults and babies because they cannot hear the smoke detector. You think, oh, it's so loud, I'll be able to hear it. But when you're in a deep sleep or when you're not wearing your hearing aids when you sleep, because people don't wear their hearing aids when they sleep, they will not be able to have any sort of hearing notification. So they have bed shaker, they have different light flashers, things like that, then they'll be able to see what they're being notified of. Or if there was an emergency alert, for example, a tornado warning, you can't turn those off on your cell phones. They'll get that notification through their cell phone, and then they'll be made aware through the notification system. Again, these are just really important safety features that a lot of us don't think about. I would say most people don't have things like this. In our household, we have smart systems, we have smart notification systems, smart light systems. There are a lot of solutions that were made for the hearing community that definitely benefit the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind community. Okay. We also offer I'm going to touch on this in a second. Personal listening devices, if a person does or does not wear hearing aids, these are just extra amplification devices that they can add to their existing phone or computer so they can hear better. They provide basically amplification over their hearing aids, or again, many people can't afford hearing aids. The commission has a hearing aid resource guide that has a list of different organizations where they provide free hearing aids or discounted hearing aids or hearing aids with a voucher. So keep that in mind if you have a consumer who might need hearing aids. Many insurance providers do not cover hearing aids. So this is a great tool or information guide resource to have. Wireless devices. I know we just have a few minutes left, and I know that was a question earlier. The program provides all these different wireless devices. We provide iPhones, Android smartphones, tablets, Apple and Android tablets, Jitterbug and Jitterbug Smart. Jitterbug Smart is a simple smartphone. All of these Apple and Android devices are unlocked, so they can go to whatever service provider you want. On our CTP page, we do have a list of all the different service providers. Since these are non-contracted, there's many affordable options out there. For example, for many of my low-income consumers, a lot of them are choosing Mint Mobile or Ting. These are just options. They're not mine necessarily. These are my recommendations. But the spreadsheet will show you what service provider it is linked to and a link to the website. So for example, Mint Mobile is a T-Mobile network. So if T-Mobile is a strong provider in a person's area, then that would be a great option to choose because they're a very discounted service, but they're still just like T-Mobile then. So we do offer these at no charge to those who qualify. Within the devices, we include apps, and these are some of the apps we include. They address video relay, like Holly mentioned. We include all of the apps. We include all free apps because we're not here to promote any profit to another company. They can download whatever apps they want, but then it gives them the option to see what is out there, what is available. So we've got all the video relay ones. We have all the caption ones. So we mentioned that caption phones for the home. Those are captioning services. Most, and they're more than just what Holly mentioned, also have mobile caption options. So it's like making a call to a caption service. They'll give you a dedicated phone number. It will be different than their cell phone. And then they'll be able to make calls using a caption service. Also, just to keep note, and I think somebody mentioned earlier, there are now captions built into iPhones and Android devices. So Android devices were first. It uses Google Live Transcribe, or actually, I'm sorry, it's called Live Caption for making calls. Whenever somebody gets a smartphone, an Android smartphone through this program, we turn it on. So it's available for them. They don't have to find it in the settings to turn on. And it will caption not only phone calls, there's live transcribe that will caption in-person conversations. It will caption videos that they're watching on their device. So basically any sound, external or internal on the device, it will caption. So if somebody is meeting with you, say you're doing an intake with somebody, filling out paperwork, person is hard of hearing, ask them if they have a smart device. Apple does the same thing. I have instructions information sheet that I will send to Erin that it includes how to turn the setting on, whether it be an Android or an Apple device. And on the other side, it lists all the different caption service providers as well, and a description of maybe what type of device it works on, because not all of them work on Apple and Android. We also include all of the video call apps on here as well. Google is great because all of their platforms are captioned through Google's service, which is Google Live Transcribe. Just so you know, Google came out with captioning first. I'm not saying that they're better, but they've been out longer. So they've done a very good job with their automatic speech recognition. What they have done is they've captured over 1 million different videos, different accents, different tones, different ages to be able to have their captions be accurate. It's not going to be perfect. If you have your captions turned on right now on this meeting, you'll see it may or may not be perfect. They may miss certain names, proper names. For example, the word auto could be AUTO. The name auto could be OTTO. So it will depend on the context and the word. We also offer sign language apps if you want to learn sign language. We offer amplification apps on there as well if people want to adjust the amplification of their device. So these are already all built in as part of the package when somebody gets a device through this program, but a person can always download these apps at no charge on their own device. Any questions on app? I hate to go through that quickly, just because that is where technology is going, smart devices. People are, as we've mentioned, are giving up their home phone service and focusing on wireless. But just so you know, a wireless device is not an amplified, it's just a standard off-the-shelf type of device that you have to add or turn on features to make it accessible for the consumer. So any questions on apps and smart devices? Okay. Oh, Mira, I cannot emphasize how convenient sign language is. Trying to say something to your kid across the pool, sign language at a concert, sign language. So mad you are practically shaking and can't get words out, sign language. So she's basically saying sign language is a solution for everything. I agree. I use sign language 24/7. My household is a deaf household. So we do what we call it, that is deaf gain, where deaf people do have an advantage in many situations, such as the examples you just gave. So I do appreciate that. And we're just going to wrap it up. Are there any other questions at all? We've talked a lot, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Anything? Well, I will provide Erin with some of the additional information that I mentioned to you today, including the hearing aid resource guide, including the Apple and Android information sheet that we just created. And if you have any questions whatsoever, I'm going to go to the final slide. Here are my contact information as well as Holly's contact information, which will be on the slide that Erin shares. Mira also just mentioned, consider fair housing. I know a lot of very loud deaf households who just don't know how slamming their cabinet doors is heard by the neighbor. Yes, you are correct. A lot of people think that deaf people are quiet. That is 100% not the case. Also, depending on if they grew up in an all deaf household, they could be generational deaf. And so that's just in their nature. Whether it be slamming a door or pounding on a door to get somebody to answer a door, pounding on the floor to get somebody's attention. There are some cues that probably in the information guide about how to get a deaf person's attention. For example, don't throw something at them, just tap them on their shoulder, flash a light. You can pound a floor so they feel the vibration. So yes, thank you, Mira. It sounds like you're familiar with a deaf household.
I have two nephews who are not deaf, but my sister and brother-in-law are. And my two nephews are the loudest children because they can scream all day long and their parents don't hear them. And I'm like, no, Aunt Holly hears you. You got to take it down a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. I am one of just a couple of hearing people on staff at the commission, and yes, I can say for sure that, but that's okay because we respect each other, and it is important to respect everybody's boundaries and everybody's environments and understand their upbringing. We're never here to tell people how or how not to behave, but again, respect your surroundings. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Again, please reach out if you have any questions. Thank you for the applause. Erin, thank you so much for organizing this. We really appreciate that.
No problem. And thank you everyone for attending. And thank you, Joanne and Holly, for your presentation. We hope to see everybody at the next webinar on September 11th, which the topic is to be determined. We're just going to still go through hopefully all the responses we got from the survey we sent out. So we will see you then, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.